All right, thanks, Courtney. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for being with us. What we're going to do today is talk about how we at the UJA-Federation of New York have navigated through multiple crises over the past few years and used them to identify opportunities for future growth. Obviously, the campaigns have been very challenging for all of us. The crises never seem to end, and yet we clearly understand and recognize how much opportunity lies ahead for us to continue to grow our campaigns. Delighted to be joined by my colleague, Courtney Weinstein, the Vice President of the Affinities Division at UJA-Federation of New York. And together we hope that we can share some good insights with you, recognizing that our campaign is somewhat sui generis to most other campaigns given the size of our campaign. But I think the lessons learned and the messages we'll convey, I think, will be relevant for all of you. So with that, let's go to the first slide. Courtney, why don't you just begin by talking about the various challenges that we faced over the past few years and give us a quick overview.
Sure. It really feels, as I'm sure all of you could appreciate, like it's been one thing after another the past few years. Obviously, among the biggest and really what kicked us off, clearly COVID, and how we all had to adapt to working and living in a totally new and different way, and the impact that had on the communities that we serve, the agencies that we support, the clients that they serve, and really just having to completely rethink and reimagine the way we do our work and the way we support the needs of our community. Of course, just as we thought we're coming out of COVID and establishing a new normal, we were hit with the crisis in Ukraine, and how, again, we were adapting our messaging and our outreach and our events and our approach to how we're going to now navigate the challenges of Ukraine, helping with the refugee crisis, helping to resettle in Israel, readapt our narrative, and now, of course, thinking about Jews in Russia and the new challenges that will continue to present short-term and then long-term, likely for years to come for us in New York, knowing that we would be getting refugees here in our community and what that meant. Global anti-Semitism. As our CEO likes to say, 5 years ago, we didn't even have a budget line in our budget for our anti-Semitism work locally. That was usually things that we supported in Europe or other communities, and now we're continuously facing in New York and certainly around the country, rise in anti-Semitism, need to focus on security of our agencies, of our community, and how our donors see UJA as a leader in this effort and what our role is relative to other organizations. Crises in Israel continue to come up and seems again like a more common occurrence in how we react and how we respond in the wake of all of these other things. Certainly in New York and elsewhere, market volatility and how that impacts our donors' ability to give, or their perceived ability to give, and how that impacts our strategies and how we think about when and how we ask for gifts relative to that market volatility. And certainly for us in New York, and I'm sure many other Northeast communities, communities out West, donors moving out of state, for us, a challenge that we have certainly seen heightened in recent years for tax reasons relative to COVID and a more remote work environment, people who have moved to Florida or elsewhere. As Mark said on our last session, I'm sure some of you on this call in your communities have benefited from the donors moving out of state or out of New York, and how you adapt to these new donors who have maybe been or not been connected to other communities, and what that means for you in sort of absorbing some of these new, whether it's New York transplants or others, into your community, and how for us to keep our donors feeling connected and committed to New York, even if they're spending more and more time outside of New York. I think collectively these challenges, and I'm sure many others, are fairly universal, not unique to New York, but certainly has helped guide our thinking over the course of the past several years. And I think more importantly, has led us to really think about how we do things differently. Each of these challenges has forced us off the proverbial hamster wheel, has allowed us to really think, as the Albert Einstein quote states, in the midst of every crisis lies a great opportunity. How we adapt, how we use these crises to fuel our work moving forward. And I think most importantly, how we use them to really show that only a federation can address all of these challenges at once and be prepared for whatever comes our way whenever it comes, as opposed to people who tend to want to give to any one of these buckets, who only care about humanitarian health and human service issues, who only care about crises overseas, who only care about anti-Semitism or Israel. Only through federation can they address all of the challenges that we face as a community, and what's to come that we don't even know is to come, but we certainly know that there will be challenges. And I think for us, certainly in New York, it's been amazing over the past few years to have us all rowing in the same direction, recognizing our unique value add is the ability to respond to multiple challenges at once, whatever they are. Mark, anything you want to add to that?
No, let's move to the next slide.
All right.
So
Well,
I think I think if we listen to all the comments Courtney made about the different challenges, we can either cry about this never-ending list of challenges we face, or we can say, wow, look at all these opportunities that they present for us. And so while we cry a little, we're choosing to focus on the opportunities that they present. And I think it's important as we look at our work every day, that we balance the scale of challenges being turned into opportunities. And we just kind of summarized over here 4 external challenges and 4 internal challenges, and how we've looked at them as opportunities. So, you know, the stock market crashed in the spring of 2020. We were all hysterical about it. But then we had, you know, an 18-month massive bounce back in the market. Did we take advantage of that bounce back to go to our donors, who we know have the most access to wealth, and try and raise additional money during that upside of the market bounce back, as opposed to only focusing on, you know, yesterday being a terrible day in the markets, but next week or next month, hopefully the market will bounce back. Let's focus on the positive. As Courtney said, you know, we have an incredibly strong case for giving. There are many organizations that focus on Israel, and they shine when Israel's in crisis. There are other organizations that focus on human services and domestic issues, and they shine when poverty and domestic issues are facing us. There are other organizations that focus on anti-Semitism, and they have their day in the sky and in the limelight when anti-Semitism is prominent. Only a federation is involved in all of these issues. So how do we make a strong case for giving that we're the only organization engaged in all of these areas, benefiting and strengthening our community in all of these places? If we make that case, we turn all these challenges into a stronger case for why people should give to us. As Courtney said earlier, those who did, you know, tremendous wealth in the community. When crisis is there, let's go back to the people who have the greatest potential to give and ask them to give, and they will. And there's been a thinning of the nonprofit pool. Many organizations have struggled. You know, unfortunately, some organizations have gone out of business. And so how do we take advantage of those opportunities to strengthen our place in the community by having people recognize the critical importance of the work we do? And on the internal level, it's forced much greater collaboration amongst our divisions and departments. We all need to be working not only internally amongst ourselves, but either between and amongst federations. And the more we can collaborate and partner, the stronger we're all going to be. And particularly as all of us have faced staff reductions. I don't think there's a person on this call who hasn't seen some reduction of staff in your federation. So in order to do even more work with fewer staff, we need to collaborate. I think the move to Zoom events, for us anyway, created far more time to focus on direct fundraising. When you didn't spend all the hours necessary, you know, doing table seating before an event, and preparing all the work that has to go into setting up an in-person event for 400 people, you can have the same 400 people on a Zoom event, a lot more efficient in time. But the question is, what have you done with your staff to ensure that they're using all their free time in a productive way? In this case, for us, focus more on fundraising. I think, you know, we've had time, you know, to deepen the engagement with donors at all levels during the COVID period, when we weren't spending all the time commuting back and forth between meetings, commuting from your office to a donor's office. You had more time to be on a Zoom call with a donor and deepening the engagement. And efficiencies in reporting and a broad, holistic approach to data is really essential. And we've all become much more technologically proficient. We've all realized that the value of using technology is essential. And so if we look at that as an opportunity that's come out of the challenge of COVID, I think it can help us improve the way we run our organizations to be more successful long term.
Absolutely. I think so, like many of you over the past few years, we have adapted our campaigns and used virtual as a new tool in our toolbox. At times, it was the only way we could engage with colleagues and donors virtually. And I think one of the things we're now all really thinking about is how do we use virtual to our benefit, and how do we use a lot of the lessons learned over the past few years to come out on the other side stronger, better than we were before. I think the guiding principles that carried us through the past few years have been continuing the importance of building communities. So whether that's online or in person, it doesn't really matter. We need to continue to have our community feel connected to each other, connected to UJA, and just continuing to keep that as a guiding principle. Along with that, of course, staying connected to our donors and how we make sure they know we're continuously thinking about them, reaching out to them, personalizing our approach and our outreach, which became, I think, even more important in a virtual world where we couldn't see people in person, and how to just maintain that connectivity wherever possible, and really just never losing sight of the ultimate goal, which is, of course, raising critical dollars for the various needs. And again, recognizing that these challenges gave us almost a perfect pitch to lean into and to really talk about why the needs have never been greater, why we need to lean on those who can to step up. And when they did step up, really it gave us tremendous insight into their capacity, their ability to give more, and their propensity to give, and to see UJA as a conduit to support needs in the community, whatever that might mean. And so while, like many of you, I think we were incredibly successful in a virtual environment and did everything we could to pivot, there's nothing that will replace face-to-face donor interaction. And I know even just this week alone, being back with donors at various events, large and small, just reinforces the importance of face-to-face. And again, how do we take those lessons learned and the efficiencies that Mark spoke about earlier, that sort of the virtual environment created for us, and now transition that back into face-to-face donor interaction, and quite honestly, not make it so easy for our donors to say, oh, I'll just Zoom in, or let's just have a Zoom meeting, or yeah, I don't need to come in person, but really continuously reinforce the importance of showing up, the importance of being in person, so that we can sustain that community and connect with people in a real and meaningful way. Mark, you want to speak a little bit more to this? And
So look, I think for all of us, large-scale fundraising events is a key part of the fundraising strategy in our communities. We were all a little shell-shocked when COVID first came around. What are we going to do? How are we going to continue to engage? And what do we do about the really critical role that events play in our work? For us, I think the key learning for us was the intentionality that's essential in moving forward with events. So we've tried to be much more focused and thoughtful and strategic. We've gone back to a full event schedule. Beginning in December of last year, we had an in-person Wall Street dinner. We usually get 2,000 people at our Wall Street dinner. We intentionally went for a much smaller dinner. We had about 800 people. We used a smaller space. We didn't expect as many people. It was really critical that we were transparent with our staff as well as with our leadership in explaining to them why we were going to have a smaller event. You don't want donors who normally think that a 2,000 person dinner is the expectation to show up and think that the event is a failure because there are only 800 people. Our goal was, was a smaller, more focused group. It's important to get quality over quantity. You don't need to fill the room with table fillers and people that that corporations are just sending because they bought a $20,000 gold page in the journal and they automatically get 10 seats for the event. You can change your strategy and say, for $20,000, you get a gold page in the journal and you get as many seats as you want. And you'll find most companies will still buy the $20,000 gold page because it's important for their business relationship with the honoree, but they'll only send the 1 or 2 members of their staff that have a relationship with the honoree. They're not just going to go and walk around the floor and find 8 young associates at the law firm and say, go to this dinner tonight, eat sushi and drink scotch. And so you're not having as many table fillers in the room. On the one hand, you need a message to people. That doesn't mean the event's not a success if there are fewer people. You need to say the event is more successful because we're raising the same amount of money or more money. We're spending less money because we're not feeding all these people who are meaningless to us, and we have a higher quality of people in the room. So, being transparent, being strategic, and being intentional about how you use events is critical. But we also have to recognize that the value of events hasn't gone away. In fact, it's become more important. Events connect us with donors and prospects in the community. They allow us to share timely and relevant programming on issues of concern. They allow us to talk about the work we do and have a client of one of our agencies or an agency exec speak about the impact of our work. They build community. We get to honor industry leaders, and most importantly, we get to raise money. So continuing to do events is essential, but how we do them has clearly shifted, and the intentionality and strategy around how we measure success of an event is the most important new approach that we've taken.
And I'll just give, to echo a lot of what Mark said, just a few really tangible examples of what that's meant for us. I mean, within the affinity campaign that I lead, we have upwards of 300 plus events a year for every industry, demographic, neighborhood, age and stage of life. And we've always, for years, as long as I've been at Federation, grappled with too many events, not enough events. Bigger events are always better. And I think really gone are the days that a successful event is when we fill the room and the speaker shows up and we say that was great. I think we really have come to appreciate, we got off that hamster wheel, we reimagined what our events looked like. And so for us, a few tangible examples of what that looked like. Mark referenced our Wall Street dinner. It used to be 2,000 people. Seating alone would take a week just to get all those people assigned seats at different tables. We moved in a new model to stadium seating where everyone just came in and took a seat. We used to print journals for every single one of our events. These were large paper. We killed, I don't even know how many thousands of trees. Over COVID, we moved to virtual journals, and that's continued now in our post-COVID world. Even when we're back in in-person events, we now use screens to show the journal. We have a QR code. We send it out in a link the day after the event. But what that allows us to do is save money on the printing costs, and more importantly, allows us to keep that journal opened an extra 3 weeks. So instead of the journal needing to close a month before the event so we can get it to print, we can now be fundraising up until the week or even the day of the event and easily get a virtual journal page in at the last minute. So something that's seemingly so simple has allowed our events to raise that much more money. I don't think we would have ever thought of that pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, our real estate community had an event for a senior honoree and an event for a junior honoree, 2 separate events at 2 separate times of the year. Now we combine to one real estate celebration. Again, I just don't think something we would have done pre-COVID because our leadership were used to it being a certain way. But after not having that event for a year, we thought about how can we make it more efficient. Now we have one event where the senior members of the community are inspired by the younger leaders and the up and coming leaders in that industry. And the younger leaders are inspired by being in a room with the older, more seasoned professionals. And so it's, again, just another way in which we've reimagined some of our events and used the past few years to evolve and reimagine and rethink the way we do things, and hopefully come out on the other side even better than we were before. And I think also just using events as a tool in our toolbox and a means to a much greater end focused on our follow-up and and we'll talk a little bit more about that.
So before we get to the specific strategies that we're focusing on to ensure campaign growth as we move into our FY23 campaign year, which began in July, just want to touch on these 9 core operating principles, which we think are so important for any successful campaign to run. Starting from the bottom left, recognize the trust the community has in us is essential. We don't make widgets. We don't sell consulting services. We ask people to give us their money to do good in the community. And so ensuring that our grants are first class, that we're having an impact in the community, and that donors continue to trust us is essential. And how we convey that message as fundraisers is critical. I think we'll continue to need to navigate the hybrid landscape and be strategic in how we do it. And we should continue to talk about that with our staff, with our leadership, in order to ensure that we're staying ahead of the curve on the new trends in hybrid work and hybrid relationships.
One of the ways, just to add, we approached hybrid is, as I like to lovingly refer to, as the silent vegetarian option. So instead of just offering people the opportunity to come in person or to log in, we certainly didn't want to cannibalize that in person. To our earlier point, getting people to come back in person is so critical to our long-term success. But if we know somebody can't come in person, that because they're out of town or because they're traveling or because they're COVID conscious or they've moved out of New York, we then offer them the option of joining us hybrid. And we've seen that that really allows us to still have people feel part of our community without it cannibalizing our in-person attendance.
We recognize that our largest donors, our most consistent donors, and our longest term donors remain the driving force of the campaign. And so continue to engage with them is really important. Collaboration, as I said earlier, is critical. In order for us to succeed, we need to be more successful in getting donors to see and feel and touch the work. So amplifying site visits and overseas missions and domestic missions and volunteer opportunities is critical. I think we need to know our donors as well as possible so we can personalize our emails and our videos and our outreach. For donors who care about Israel, make sure you're updating them on the work you're doing in Israel or on the new plane load of Ethiopian olim that arrived today. But for a donor who only cares about Jewish education or social services, I wouldn't forward them an email about the plane load of Ethiopian Jews that arrived in Israel today. So creating the customized, personalized engagement is critical. I think recognizing that planned giving and supplemental giving and capital giving is an essential part to our long-term strength is essential. And while we focus on the annual campaign all the time, we cannot ever forget about the need to focus on those additional campaigns and run holistic FRD initiatives. I think mining the data and understanding how much data resides inside our system. In New York, our fundraising system is called FR101, but we all have so much data sitting inside our computers. How we unpack that, how we peel back the onion, and how we maximize use of that data is essential. And lastly, enhancing our internal operations, improving efficiency, lowering time spent wasted on stuff that can be done much more much faster today, I think is essential. And if we look at all of these initiatives, we're going to result in having a successful campaign. And we've identified 5 key strategies, which Courtney will talk about now, which we think are the keys to a successful campaign this year.
Sure. So taking sort of everything we've learned over the course of the past few years and all the challenges that have come our way, really looking at data in a much more critical way to come up with these 5 very measurable goals that we think will have tremendous growth opportunity for us. So one of the most enlightening sort of things we saw over the past several years is that most of our donors remain flat year after year, and that we had really created a culture at UJA, for better or for worse, where we're asking donors, we go out, we meet with them, we call them, we email them, and we say, we really hope you'll renew your support for UJA, or that we can count on your support again. And the critical thing that we've forgotten to really think about is, how do we actually ask people to increase? And a lot of that is connected with all of the increased needs. Because of all of these challenges, we have a unique opportunity to just shift our culture and reframe how we ask our tried and true donors. And instead of saying, and we really hope we can count on your support again, and we really hope you'll renew your gift, to actually say, because of all of these challenges we faced in the community, and because of all of the different ways in which UJA has stepped up time and time again, we really hope that you'll increase your gift. And as Mark likes to remind us, most of our donors don't remember what they gave last year. And if we just say, can we count on you again? They'll say, sure. But if we actually put out a number that's reflective of what we think they can give, or what's reflective and inclusive of maybe one of the emergency relief gifts that they've given in the past few years, for us, one of those key growth areas is to have more donors, less donors stay flat or of course decrease, and more donors that increase their gifts. And how do we train our teams and really focus on fewer flat and decreased gifts, and increasing the number of increased gifts from our tried and true donors. And this is whether it's $1,000 donor who gives $1,000 every year, or it's $100,000 donor who gives that amount every year. It really doesn't matter. How are we sort of earning the right to ask that donor for an increase? What are we doing throughout the year to educate and inspire them? And then when it comes to asking, how are we making sure that we don't just ask them to do same as, but we really ask them to think about all the ways in which we've stepped up over the year and how they can then increase their support to meet those increased needs in the coming year.
And the key thing just to recognize over there is as Courtney said, I fully believe that many, if not a majority of our donors don't remember what they gave last year. They know they're supportive, they know they gave, if they gave a supplemental gift, they don't know whether their Ukraine gift or their COVID gift was processed as in a separate campaign line by your federation. And so if we go in and we change the mindset and we change the culture amongst our teams, that we just assume that we're going to ask for an increase, we'll be shocked at how many people will just say, sure, when you come in and, $10,000 donor who gave an extra $3,000 for COVID, if you just come in this year and say, can we count on you for $15,000 gift this year? They may just say yes. If they say no, what did I give last year? Then you say 13,000 and say, okay, I'll do 13. Now you have a new base, because they basically 10 for many years. They gave an extra 3,000 for COVID. They're going to say sure at 13. You're not going to win that argument or that strategy every time. Some donors are going to very clearly say, well, 10,000 is my normal gift. I want to go back to 10, and let that be the fallback position. But that shouldn't be the approach. You should begin every conversation with the assumption you're going to ask for more money than they gave last year.
Absolutely. And Ukraine and COVID before that really provided the perfect impetus to understand what that next level might be for many of our donors. So for us in New York, we had 146 people who gave brand new gifts of $1,000 or more, people who had never given to our campaign before. So as you saw on the last slide, one of the things we did was we really mined who are those people, where do they live, where do they work, who might know them, and how do we sustain those new donors who saw UJA as a conduit for their Ukraine giving, but had never given to us before. And so that for us is a huge focus, retaining those new donors. And then in addition, we had about another 25 million that came in from existing donors that increased their gifts and made additional gifts for Ukraine. So how do we sustain that increase, and what do we do to set them at that new base and hopefully incorporate their Ukraine gift or their COVID gift or whatever that emergency gift was into their new baseline gift for UJA. Some will go back, some will stay, but if we don't ask and we don't do our homework to figure out the right strategy, we'll never know if we can sustain some of those Ukraine increases, and particularly those Ukraine new donors who are a tremendous opportunity for us in the year ahead. So certainly something all our teams are focused on. The next measurable goal is our donors, particularly in the 1 to 5K range. So for us, we have seen over the past several years, this is an area of particular challenge for us. While we have seen growth in our donor base at the 5K and above level, more people giving at those levels, we've seen a decline, steady decline in donors in that 1 to 5K range. And so one of our priorities and measurable goals for this year is really just to even sustain that 1 to 5K donor base and stem some of the decline that we've seen at that level. For us, many of our fundraisers, that's a bulk of their portfolios or donors in that 1 to 5K. And so really just encouraging people to stay on pace with their donors at all levels and really double down on that 1 to 5K. It's also an area, we've all referenced, it was mentioned this morning and earlier as well, the decreased staff and turnover in staff in many of our federations, and recognizing that it's really hard for a new fundraiser to come in, inherit a portfolio, stay on pace with those new donors that they're developing relationships with, and equally hard for a donor to constantly have a steady stream of new fundraisers and how to build those relationships. And so something that we're really working on and being mindful of in our strategies. The next one is on multi-year skips. So one of the things we noticed is, while we've always been focused on who didn't give last year and how do we bring them back in, a huge opportunity for us is looking at people who didn't give 2, 3, 5, 10 years ago, haven't given in the past 2, 3, 5, or 10 years, and how do we bring them back? And I think, particularly COVID, some people couldn't give that year, or we were hesitant to go to them during COVID. Looking back on who are those donors that stopped giving 2 or 3 years ago, revisiting them. If you're a new fundraiser inheriting a node, how do you look back on people who maybe didn't give several years ago and use being new as an opportunity to re-engage them, not just looking at people who didn't give last year. And then the last measurable goal is really looking, again, we spent some time focusing on events. How are we using our events and people coming to our events, and do just a little bit better at converting those event attendees from prospects to donors, and really focusing on our follow-up strategies. People who came into our doors, heard the message, saw the signage, and how do we really focus on turning them into donors? And if we do just a little bit better on that, and really with each of these things, the overarching theme is to just improve upon the margins. Because if in each of these areas we just did a little bit better than we're doing, I think we would see, I know we would see tremendous growth in our campaign. And so for us, it's really not about doing anything new or monumentally different than what we've been doing. It's just really honing in on these 5 areas. And in each of them, we think even just moving a few percentage points could, for us, mean millions of dollars to our campaign in new and increased revenue. Mark, anything you want to add to those goals, or to talk about the
look,
impact?
I think it's essential to recognize where most of your campaign comes from. For us in New York, 98% of our revenue every year comes from 25% of our donors that give 1K plus. And my guess is, in any community, if you analyze your donor level giving, you'll see that somewhere between 92 and 99% of your money is coming from your 1K plus donors. And so that should be where your focus is. And it's so much easier to go back and pick that low-hanging fruit and deepen your connection, deepen the donor impact, deepen the trust they have, which will lead to additional giving, than it is to go out and come up with brand new strategies and brand new communities to bring new people in. It doesn't mean you don't continue to focus on new prospects, but if you really want to see significant growth in the campaign, we believe by focusing on this low-hanging fruit. And if you look at the right side of the chart, donor impact is essential to this. So how do we deepen the personal connections and donor journeys? How do we customize our storytelling and know what's going to most powerfully impact these donors? How do we get more donors on missions and cycles and volunteerism? And how do we enhance cross-collaboration internally? If we can focus on those areas of deepening donor impact, we're fully confident that we'll be able to pick a lot more low-hanging fruit from the tree of our existing donor base to grow our campaign significantly, while still allowing us the time and space to bring new donors into the system.
And I can't stress enough that focus on the collaboration. Yeah, I'm just thinking about one of our new Ukraine donors. It was probably the largest of the new donors, made a first-time gift to UJA of $20,000 for Ukraine. And just by doing a little bit of homework on this this couple, one of the wife is a lawyer, the husband works on Wall Street, they live in Scarsdale, which is one of the commuted neighborhoods in Westchester, and recognizing the importance, they have young children that we can engage through volunteerism. And so really what we've been doing more and more of, and I think COVID in the virtual universe really amplified our ability to do this, but really having multiple fundraisers come together and work on a strategy to recognize that the whole is always going to be greater than the sum of its parts. And if we only look at them as a lawyer or Wall Street or family with young children or somebody who lives in Scarsdale, we're going to miss a much more holistic approach to how we invite them to the right events, deepen their engagement, work in multiple ways, find multiple other lay leaders who can connect with them. And again, I think just the virtual universe and our ability to just, instead of having to meet somebody in person, but rather lean into easier ways of meeting together, bringing colleagues together for a quick meeting, has really enhanced our ability to go deep, as Mark referenced, and take our existing donors to the next level with just a deeper, more thoughtful, strategic approach. So with that, really welcome any thoughts or questions. So feel free to please unmute yourself, and I'm happy to engage in any conversation.
What are some of the successful strategies you use to actually get some of those multi-year skips back?
Great. I think it starts with running the list and making sure you know who they are. I think often, especially again, referencing the turnover in staff. So you have a new fundraiser who inherits a portfolio, and most often they're just looking at, okay, well, who are the people who gave last year that I'm now responsible for? And I think it's just even the consciousness that they need to know to go back to who in that portfolio maybe gave 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and it often just falls off of our radar. And so I think part of it for us has just been an awareness that these people exist. They exist in our database. They just sometimes fall off of our radar very easily, particularly with staff turnover. Mark, if you want to add anything to that.
I think the other opportunity for us is to call these donors and reach out to them and say, I'm new. You know, I was looking through some lists. I noticed that you had been a regular donor, and in 2018, you know, you stopped giving. Love to understand what prompted you to stop giving. And so many of our staff that focus on our long-term major donors have been around for a long time and they have deep relationships. But we have so many new staff and younger staff who have these huge portfolios of skip donors, and it's very easy to call them up and play the card, I'm new. And some people are going to be totally disinterested. They stop giving because something happened that they didn't want to give. But for many people, we're going to find that a staff member left and no one called them. And if nobody calls you to give, like, people don't just voluntarily write checks. They want someone to reach out and solicit them. And so people just fall off the radar. And then, after 2 years of not giving, they become invisible. They don't show up on your regular reports that you run. They're long-term non-donors. And we just came to realize that we have such a massive inventory of multi-year skips that we're now going back, 10 years and 15 years and looking at people who may have been regular donors until 2008. They stopped giving in the 2008 financial crisis. And after 2 or 3 years of not giving, nobody's gone back to them, but they may have given for 15 years consecutively and stopped giving, in 2008. Perfect time to go back to them and try and re-engage them.
And I would just add that this is also a great way to utilize lay leaders, because you have new lay leaders now than you did 2, 3, 5, 10 years ago, and bringing them these lists, they haven't seen them before, and say, who do you know? And can you help us? And even if they're not willing to solicit, I know many of us have challenges with getting lay leaders to solicit, they can at least give intel. Oh yeah, they've been at a new firm for the past 5 years. They're doing really well. Oh, they're no longer on the board of that organization, or their kids are out of college now, so they may be feeling a little bit more flush. But using new lay leaders to look at old lists is sort of a great way to combine efforts and have a fresh perspective on and get new intel to inform some of our strategies moving forward as well.
But the key issue is, what's the story you're telling and what's the case you're making? And so in order for you to be successful, you have to fully understand and embrace the meaning and impact of the work we do. And again, calling someone who hasn't given for 4 or 5 or 6 years is easy to make the call. It's a lot harder to make the case. On the other hand, it's very easy to make the case, because if you can eloquently and passionately talk about all the support we've given to Ukrainian refugees and all the work we've done in our community around COVID and all the work we're doing to fight anti-Semitism and all the work we're doing to support Israel and all the work you're doing to support Jewish education and all the work you're doing to strengthen your JCCs and make that case, most people are going to say, wow, I want to be part of something like that. And so having a toolbox of stories and being able to make a strong case for the unique value proposition that the Federation provides in the community is going to be the key, determinator of whether or not you're going to get the gift or not.
And I think the past few years has given us a great opportunity, because I know, at least in New York, several of, we have donors who stopped giving because they wanted to do things more targeted. They wanted to give to a specific cause or an organization that's much more targeted and meeting whatever their interest areas are. And if the past few years have taught us anything, it's the recognition that only an organization like a federation, as we've said, can give to multiple things. And so they might actually see our value proposition in a very different way than they did a few years ago when they stopped giving to us in order to give much more targeted. And so revisiting that conversation, and we have a unique moment to do that. Other questions in the time that we have?
If there are no more questions.
If I could ask,
Oh, go ahead.
hi,
Sure. go
my
ahead.
name's Britt Finney-Conlon. Sorry, my lighting's a little all over the place. I know that you talked about language that you found successful for asking for increases, and that we need to update that language so that it's not just saying, will you renew, but ask for the increase. I know you mentioning a specific number, and that's helpful too, but I'm curious what other language suggestions you had for asking about those increases.
Yeah, so again, I think every case is going to be different. Every fundraiser approaches it differently. Every donor is a unique situation. Again, I think if you had a $10,000 donor who made a $5,000, who's been flat at $10,000 for the last 6 years, and they gave you $5,000 for the Ukraine crisis, go in and be very specific and say to them, last year you gave us $15,000, so we can count to 15,000 this year. You know that 15 is including the Ukraine gift. If they say yes, now you've built in a $5,000 new gift, and 15 becomes the new base, and that foundation of your campaign is now built on a $5,000 increase, which rolls over year over year over year, and that's the new base. That's one approach. Second approach for a donor who's a $10,000 donor who's been flat at 10,000, instead of coming in and saying, hope you'll re-up your gift, hope you'll renew your gift, hope you'll do the same as you did last year, go in and say, hope you'll consider a $12,000 gift this year. I guarantee you, half your donors don't even know that they gave you 10,000 last year. They don't remember what they gave you. If you ask them for 10, they'll say, sure. If you ask them for 12, half of them are going to say, absolutely, that's great. Some of them are going to say, wait, what did I give last year? Didn't I give 10? Then you say yes, and then you start the conversation about inflation and needs and why they should give more. But if you ask for, go in and ask for 12 and just do it with a straight face and an assumption they're going to give you 12, many of them will say, sure, no problem. So I think you have to approach it differently. You have to know your donors. You have to develop your own sense of comfort. But the key issue here is developing the self-awareness that you should never be going in with the expectation you're going to ask for the same gift as last year. You always want to go in with the assumption that somehow, depending on how the conversation goes, you're going to want to ask them for more money than they gave last year.
I would just add to that 2 things. One, failure is not getting the increase. Failure is not trying to get the increase. And I think we've really tried to instill in our staff never to feel discouraged if they don't get the increase, but only to be upset if they didn't even try for it. And also Mark mentioned inflation. I think we're in a really unique moment where it just costs more to do the same things that we've always done. It costs more to serve the same number of clients that we did before. It costs more to buy the same food for the food bank, and forget the fact that there's more people who need that food. Even just the same food is costing more. And I think just leaning into the reality of those statistics really does make that ask for an increase that much more tangible. And I think for most of our donors who are experiencing that in their own lives, they can really appreciate how much more it costs us to do the things we've always done and to serve the people we've always served, let alone the fact that there are more people who need to be served than there was a year or two ago, because of all of the challenges and crises that we've talked about today. So there really is some tangible stats on that to back up the ask about why we need them to step up now. And quite honestly, I don't think we had that 5 years ago. We didn't have such a real reason. It was just, well, because we want you to give more than you did last year. Now we really do have a reason to ask for it.
I think we have time for one more question, if anyone has one. If not, we hope that the advice and practical suggestions were useful. Thanks for all you do for your communities. Go out, ask for increases, focus on your most loyal long-term donors, look for the low-hanging fruit, and have great campaigns and raise a lot of money to support the needs in your community. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.